going to be studying Psalms, Authentic Worship for Today's Woman with me. You know, today throughout the world, there are faithful women everywhere who are going to open their Bible and they're going to pray the Psalms and sing the Psalms. Some of them will be alone. Some of them will be surrounded by friends. Some are going to go to the Psalms rejoicing about what God has done, and others, well, they'll be looking for hope, and they're in need of desperate hope. I have a student who is now a hospital chaplain, and she told me that it's the Psalms that she takes to the bedsides of the ill and the dying as she speaks into their lives. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Psalms have been a source of tremendous comfort and hope for so many people. They've just learned of the wonderful forgiveness in Jesus Christ, or they look for the first time into the eyes of a newborn. Maybe they find out that they have cancer, or someone that they love has preceded them in death. And almost instinctively, as a drowning victim reaches out for a lifeline, the Christian looks to the Psalms. We find the Psalms a wonderful way to worship God as well. And in addition, there's another benefit to studying the Psalms that I want to focus on today. And that is that the Psalms are God's gateway to our emotional health. They are God's gateway to our emotional health. You know, when you look at the Psalms, you need to understand that in many ways it's a very unique book in the Bible. Most of the books of the Bible is God speaking to us. But in the Psalms, by and large, we, or the authors in our place, are speaking to God and speaking acceptably. And there's where we learn that how it is that we can process our emotions, that we can speak acceptably to God as we reach out for comfort and for hope. God, I believe, preserved the Psalms as a way to give us a pattern to process our emotions in a healthy way. Many of the authors of the Psalms, we find them in a state of grief. They're grieving, or they're wrestling with the same kind of issues that we wrestle with today. Or they're rejoicing, or they're ranting. We have some Psalms called the imprecatory Psalms, in which the psalmist says, I've had it, go get them, God, they're my enemies, I can't stand anymore. And even in those kinds of Psalms, it's interesting to note that in all of them but one, the psalmist ultimately turns back to God and gathers his senses about him. When you think about your emotions, do you think of them as a friend or a foe? You know, God's an emotional being. God has perfect emotions. God loves deeply, has tremendous compassion. God feels anger, but it's always a righteous anger, and jealousy and irritation. But his emotions are always used appropriately. And he is in complete touch with his emotions. Genesis 1:27 tells us that we are made in his image. And so he didn't make us as robots. A wonderful way, an attribute that he gave us that's his very own, are our emotions. But because we have a sin nature, that sin nature taints our emotions. And so we don't always use them appropriately. Sometimes we have negative thoughts, or we ruminate in our fears, or we are irritable, or we lack patience. Our emotions can be our enemy. And emotions out of whack can be absolutely disastrous. A study done on 118 law students, they were researched over a period of time, discovered that those students who gave their anger full vent, well, they were the ones who in their latter years had a much higher percentage of cancer and diabetes and heart disease. You know, that alone is a great reason to study the Psalms. We're all different in our emotions. God has made us that way. Some of us are extremely sensitive, oversensitive. And some of us are aggressive bulldogs who let our emotions carry us away. And some of us are really not even aware of our emotions. We don't know what we're feeling or why we're feeling the way that we're feeling. We refuse to feel. And as a result, we're unhealthy in our emotional, that emotional part of us. And if we don't learn how to process our emotions in healthy ways, we're like a human yo-yo that's tossed up and down, to and fro. And our emotions take us to places that we don't want to go, and places that God never intended for us. For most of us, what we feel has tremendous impact on what we think and how we act and what we believe about God, about ourselves, about others. There's tremendous impact on what we value and what we do. So much power. How much power have you granted to your emotions? Well, it's my desire that through the Psalms, as we study them together, you will begin to process your emotions in healthier ways. And as a result, you will begin to let those positive emotions be in control of your life. Emotions like the fruit of the Spirit, so that it's love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and self-control that dominates your thinking and your life. That's our goal, to feel completely, to feel in real ways, but to feel and use our emotions in positive ways. How do we do that? Well, I can only share a little bit of my own testimony. I came to faith in my mid-20s. I was an absolute mess, came out of a pagan home, and I have a very tender, sensitive nature, and in my flesh, a very unbalanced nature. I tend to, everything's either wonderful, I go to extremes. Everything's great or everything's terrible. And as a result, in my early years, I suffered quite a bit from severe depression. Well, I became a Christian and I decided I'm just going to gut it out. I'm going to be a good girl. I'm not going to feel. I'm just going to do the right thing. And so I would stuff my emotions. But I can tell you that does not work, because you stuff it and you stuff it and you stuff it, and one day you stuff too much and the lid blows off of it and you erupt like Mount Vesuvius, and it's not a good day. Just ask my husband. Now I want to end with just a couple of, I think, useful tidbits about Psalms. One thing that I think is helpful for you to know is that the Psalms are in the middle of the Bible, so you can always find them easily. And the Psalms were the songbook of the Old Testament temple. They were written beginning about 1,000 years before Christ, and no other book of the Bible has as many authors. And no other book of the Bible, except for Genesis, covers such a long period of time. It's also helpful whenever we study the Bible to think about what kind of divine literature we are studying. And the Psalms are lyrical poetry. Beautiful pictures that the author paints of the sunset and the sky and the heavens and the mountains and animals and sunsets and the seas, and all these wonderful images that take spiritual truths and bring them into our minds and plant them into our souls in beautiful ways that stick with us. Lyrical poetry. But there's a caution. We have to ask, as we're studying a psalm, is this that the author has written figurative or is it literal? Let me give you an example. In Psalm 91, verse 4, Psalm 91, verse 4, the author writes, "He," meaning God, "will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. Now, is that literal or is it figurative? Well, it's literal. It's figurative. No, it's not literal. It's figurative. How do we know that? Well, because God doesn't have feathers and God doesn't have wings. God is not a bird. God is not a chicken. What the author is attempting to say here is that like a hen, God gathers us under his wings for comfort and for protection. A beautiful way of saying this, but it's figurative language, and we have to be sure that we think in terms and we ask the question, how do we believe the original author meant for his original audience to understand this particular verse? Psalms links us to the past. We've seen that it is the songbook of the Old Testament. And all of those who loved God sang and prayed the Psalms. We know that Jesus sang and prayed the Psalms. It was part of the liturgy of that time. And as did the apostles and all of the saints and all of the Christians from there on, the early church fathers and all into church history, we have records of them singing and praying the Psalms. And I believe that the Psalms will be the songbook of heaven, that one day all Christians will come together before God's throne, and we will sing the Psalms as we worship our mighty God. So, welcome to the Psalms. Enjoy.